Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we turn softly toward the strange, to the quiet corners of history where death came not as expected, but in the most peculiar ways. The Middle Ages were filled with danger, yes, but also with oddity. And tonight, we'll explore the most bizarre deaths whispered down through time, not with horror, but with curiosity and a little wonder. Before we begin, if you enjoy these gentle walks through forgotten roads of history, feel free to like or subscribe, only if it brings you peace. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something lovely about imagining us all quietly drifting from different places in the world, united by stillness. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a candle flicker nearby. Settle in and let us wander gently into a world where death was sometimes not just cruel, but unusual. The king who laughed to death. Come close now, dear listener. Let us begin not with blood or battle, but with laughter, sweet, uncontrollable laughter, and a king undone by it. The year was 1135. The land, what is now known as England. And the man at the center of our quiet story was a Danish noble visiting the English court. His name, long forgotten by most, was reputedly Sigurd the Jester, a man with a heart light enough to delight others, and apparently to destroy himself. The tale goes that Sigurd, already of an elderly age and full of wine, found himself at a banquet where a juggler, perhaps clumsy, perhaps divine, performed a routine so absurd, so inexplicably ridiculous, that Sigurd began to laugh, and laugh, and laugh. At first, it was joyous, the kind of laughter that lifts the spirit. But then, it didn't stop. His face flushed, his shoulders shook. Servants watched with growing concern as the nobleman's merriment turned ragged, breathless, trembling. His companions begged him to stop, pleaded for him to breathe, but he could not. It is said he laughed for nearly 5 minutes straight, until, quite suddenly, he collapsed. Some claim it was a heart attack. Others say his ribs gave way. Still others insist it was simply the body, overwhelmed by joy it was never meant to carry for so long. And so, Sigurd the Jester, whose title was not jest, but lineage, died not by sword or sickness, but by sheer, unrelenting mirth. In a world so often heavy with fear and famine, it was, in its own way, a beautiful absurdity. A reminder that even joy, when unbridled, can be too much. That the line between laughter and death is sometimes as thin as a breath held too long. So if you smile now, tucked warmly in your bed, let it be soft. Let it linger like a candle's flame, gentle, steady, and safe. The monk and the cheese wheel. Picture it, dear listener, a monastery nestled among rolling hills, its stone walls cooled by shadow and silence, where chants echoed and candles flickered like thoughts made visible. Here lived Brother Thomas, a monk known not for his holiness or intellect, but for his appetite. His love, above all, was cheese. This was no sin in itself. Cheese was nourishment, a gift from God and goat alike. But Brother Thomas was indulgent. While others fasted, he schemed. While others meditated, he smuggled wedges and rounds into his cell like forbidden treasure. One night, after a particularly large harvest celebration, a great wheel of cheese was delivered to the abbey. A wheel so large, it required 2 men to carry it. Golden and fragrant, it was placed in the cellar, meant to be portioned slowly over the weeks to come. But Brother Thomas, he could not wait. Slipping down to the cellar by candlelight, he pulled a wedge from the wheel, and then another. And then, unable to help himself, he tried to roll the entire wheel across the floor, up toward his chamber, it is believed. But what happened next was whispered for generations. Perhaps his footing slipped. Perhaps the stone was slick. Whatever the reason, the great wheel toppled, and Brother Thomas, caught beneath it, was pinned, smothered by the very object of his longing. When his absence was noticed, monks found him the next morning, still beneath the cheese, his expression oddly peaceful. As if, even in death, he had achieved something deeply satisfying. Was it gluttony or devotion of another kind? Whatever it was, Brother Thomas became a quiet legend of the abbey, a warning and a joke all at once. And tonight, as we remember him, let us do so gently. Let no comfort become your burden. Let desire rest lightly. And may your dreams be peaceful, strange, and soft. Death by manuscript. In a world without printing presses, books were treasure. Slow, painstaking, holy things copied by hand. Scribes spent long hours bent over desks in scriptoria, eyes strained by candlelight, fingers ink-stained, backs bent like willows. It was sacred work, quiet work. And yet, one such task, meant to bring wisdom to the world, brought death instead. In a small priory in what is now northern France, there lived a scribe named Etienne. Known for his delicate script and meticulous work, Etienne was often entrusted with the copying of the largest volumes, encyclopedias, psalters, illuminated tomes with gilded edges and thick leather-bound covers. One morning, as he reached to retrieve a completed volume from the upper shelf of the library, the structure, ancient and weary, gave way. The shelf collapsed, and with it came the weight of knowledge itself. Dozens of bound tomes, each weighing as much as a stone, tumbled down like judgment. Etienne, startled, could not move in time. The heaviest struck his head, and he was found hours later beneath a quiet pile of vellum and wisdom. There was no noise, no cry, just a soft ending beneath the words he loved. The monks mourned him not with tears, but with silence. And then, in a twist both strange and gentle, they copied a final book in his honor. Inside its first page, written in soft Latin script, were the words, "Here lies Brother Etienne, taken not by sword, but by syllable." So, if you keep books by your bed, dear one, rest easy, but perhaps keep the heaviest on the bottom shelf, the Baron and the window. Now, let us travel to a castle, tall and proud, its gray stones standing firm against the wind, overlooking a sleepy countryside wrapped in mist. Inside this fortress lived a baron, a man of considerable wealth and ego, known less for kindness than for vanity. His name was Lord Everick, and he was not a cruel man, but he loved his reflection, perhaps too much. In those days, mirrors were rare and precious. Most saw only their images in polished metal or still water, but Lord Everick, thanks to his wealth, owned a piece of mirrored glass, warped and slightly cloudy, but wondrous all the same. He positioned it by the window in his chambers so that the sunlight would strike it just so, catching the sharp lines of his jaw and the noble curl of his mustache. Each day, as the servants bustled below and the bells tolled in the courtyard, the Baron would admire himself, tilting his head, smoothing his beard, rehearsing expressions of sorrow or command in case they were needed later. But one day, something went strangely wrong. They say it was after a storm. The window frames had been loosened, the floor damp from the rain. As Lord Everick leaned toward the glass to better observe the glint in his eye, the floor beneath him gave way. Just a splinter, just a crack, enough to surprise him. And as he stumbled, arms flailing, he fell forward, not dramatically, not far, but just enough to hit his head on the stone edge of the window's sill. A simple blow, sharp and clean, a sound like a dropped goblet. The servants found him moments later, collapsed beside his reflection, his lifeless eyes still staring into the mirror. The villagers whispered of vanity's punishment, the monks of fate's subtle cruelty. But perhaps, dear listener, it was neither. Perhaps it was simply peculiar. A man undone not by war or treachery, but by the very face he loved too well. So tonight, when you catch your own reflection, smile softly. But do not linger too long, the dancing plague that took them all. Let us step now into a sunlit square, warm and dusty, where a market stalls once stood and laughter filled the air, until the music began. It was the year 1518, and in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. No lute played, no flute piped, and yet she moved. Her arms lifted, her feet struck the ground in rhythm only she could hear. At first, people smiled. Then they watched. Then they joined. By the end of the week, dozens were dancing. By the second week, there were hundreds. But it was not joyous. It was desperate. Bodies moved beyond their will, feet bleeding, muscles cramping, eyes wide with fear. No one could stop. Some collapsed. Some rose again. And some did not rise at all. Doctors blamed overheated blood. Priests blamed spirits. The town council ordered musicians to play, thinking that controlled rhythm might help. But it only fed the frenzy. One man, a baker they say, danced for nearly 2 days before falling dead on the stones. Another, a young scribe, was found smiling, his legs still twitching, lips mouthing words to a tune long faded. Heart attacks, strokes, sheer exhaustion. These were the quiet killers. No one could explain it. No poison, no plague, just dance. Relentless, terrifying dance. It faded eventually. As summer waned and the air cooled, so too did the fever. The square returned to silence, but the memory remained. And for years after, the stones were swept more carefully. The music played more softly. So tonight, as quiet fills your room and your limbs grow still, be grateful for your rest. Not every rhythm is a blessing, and not every step leads home. Death by Feathered Faith. High in the mountains of old Bohemia, nestled between pine and fog, stood a solitary monastery known for its eccentric brotherhood. Monks devoted to peace, to prayer, and to geese. Yes, geese. You see, dear listener, this order believed that the humble goose, with its honking cries and proud waddle, was a divine messenger. They believed its voice echoed the sounds of ancient saints, and that its habits were pure, uncorrupted by man's more foolish ways. Brother Alaric was among their most devoted. He walked with the geese daily, spoke to them softly, and even slept in the barn when one of them was ill. The others thought him odd, but harmless, until the day of the feast. It was a cold spring morning when the brothers gathered to celebrate the renewal of their vows. A large goose, particularly vocal, particularly fond of Brother Alaric, had taken to following him closely, too closely. During the feast, the monks laughed as the goose tugged at Alaric's robe, nibbled his fingers, climbed into his lap. And then, the accident. Startled by a loud bell, the goose flapped violently, knocking over a brazier set nearby. Embers scattered. The tablecloth caught. Panic ensued. In the chaos, Brother Alaric slipped, struck his head, and never regained consciousness. The fire was quickly smothered. The goose honked mournfully for days. Some blamed the bird, some blamed fate, but the monks agreed. Alaric had died in service to his faith, however peculiar that faith may have been. So tonight, if you hear the call of a bird in the dark, know that once, long ago, someone believed it was sacred. And perhaps, in some strange way, they were right. The Knight and the Turnip. Our story now brings us to the edge of absurdity. To a battlefield, yes, but one without battle. A knight named Sir Godfrey, noble in title, if not in sense, prepared for a duel that never happened. The tale, passed down from servant to son to scholar, begins with an argument over supper. Another knight, unnamed, forgotten, mocked Godfrey's table manners. Pride wounded, Sir Godfrey demanded satisfaction. A duel at dawn, swords, honor. But that night, in preparation for glory, Sir Godfrey insisted on a hearty meal. He believed, with absolute certainty, that the secret to strength was the humble turnip. Not one, but many. He ate them roasted, boiled, mashed, entire baskets emptied onto his plate. The servants watched in awe and fear. Come morning, the sun rose. The field was misty. The duel was to begin. But Sir Godfrey did not arrive. He was found in his chambers, sprawled across the floor, the remains of his feast still warm. Some say it was gluttony. Some say it was poisoning. But most believe it was simply indigestion. A fatal excess of turnips, heavy on the stomach, light on the wisdom. The duel was called off. The mocking knight went home, and Sir Godfrey passed into legend, not for bravery, not for skill, but for the strangest death ever recorded in the annals of knighthood. So tonight, dear one, as you rest with a satisfied belly, let it be just that, satisfied, not stuffed. For even vegetables, taken too far, may end in silence. The curious fate of the royal falconer. In the court of King Alaric of the Western Isles, falcons were not merely birds. They were symbols of power, status, and precision, feathers with purpose, eyes like steel, and none loved them more than the king's falconer, Master Harlan. Harlan was tall, solemn, always smelling faintly of feathers and wind. His birds obeyed him utterly, returning from the skies with grace and ease. He spoke to them in whispers, and they, it seemed, whispered back. But one falcon, a golden creature named Merelda, was different, fierce, independent, intelligent. Some whispered she was enchanted. Others said she had been raised from an egg with a drop of royal blood. One afternoon, before a royal hunt, Harlan stood atop the highest tower, preparing Merelda for flight. Below, the nobles gathered, cheering, drinking, waiting for the spectacle. Harlan released her. She soared. And then she did not return. He called, he whistled. Nothing. Hours passed. Dusk fell. Still nothing. Then suddenly, a shadow against the moon. Merelda returned, but not to the glove. She struck Harlan full in the face, talons cutting deep, wings flapping like fury itself. He stumbled, shocked, and fell. The tower was high, the ground unkind. Silence fell over the court. The bird circled once, then vanished into the woods. No one knows why. Some say he mishandled her. Others claim she saw something in the crowd, a threat, a curse, a ghost. But whatever the reason, the king wept for Harlan and declared the falcon sacred. She was never caged again. And so, if ever you see a bird soaring high, alone and proud, remember, once a falcon claimed a man's life, not in rage, but in mystery. Chapter 9. The Miller and the Moon. There was a mill once on the banks of a quiet river, its wheel turning slowly through the days and nights, its stones grinding grain for the village beyond. The man who ran it, Old Thomas they called him, was not young, nor especially wise, but he was known for telling grand tales and for watching the sky. The villagers often found him outside his mill at odd hours, staring up at the moon with the kind of awe usually reserved for saints or stars. He believed, quite deeply, that the moon could speak. Not in words, no, but in signs, in shadows, in moments of perfect silence. On the night of a harvest moon, full and golden, brighter than any the village could recall, Thomas wandered out once more, leaving his supper half-eaten and the millstones still. He stood for hours in the clearing beside the mill, watching the sky with eyes wide and glassy. And then, quite suddenly, he ran. The next morning, they found his body in the river, face up, arms stretched wide as if embracing the sky. No wounds, no marks, no signs of struggle, just stillness. His boots were still dry, lying neatly by the riverbank, and his walking stick leaned gently against a tree. The priest said it was a heart attack. The healer suggested sleepwalking. But some, especially the children who had once listened to his stories, whispered that the moon had finally spoken, and Thomas had followed. So now, dear one, as the moon hangs softly outside your window, glowing with its ancient, silent light, think kindly of Thomas the Miller. For perhaps, in his final moments, he found something beyond the grinding stone and the river's slow churn. And may your dreams tonight be just as strange and just as peaceful. The candlemaker's final spark. In the heart of a bustling medieval town, where shutters clattered and carts groaned over cobblestones, lived a woman known simply as Agnes the Waxworker. Her hands were always slick with tallow and beeswax, and the smell of smoke clung to her like a shawl. She made candles not only for light, but for ceremony, for births, for blessings, for burials. Each one hand-dipped, each one made with care. Agnes believed candles had a kind of soul. She said they remembered things, the hands that held them, the prayers spoken over them, the tears they saw. And so, she worked alone, and always in silence. Her shop was narrow, filled with rows of flickering flames and shelves of carved wax figures. Some said she talked to them when she thought no one was near. One autumn evening, the townsfolk noticed smoke curling from her workshop. Not the usual soft plume, but thick, black, unnatural. By the time they reached the door, it was too late. The fire had moved quickly, fed by the wax, by the wooden racks, by the countless little flames left burning. They found her near the back, untouched by flame, but breathless, overcome by smoke. In her hands, clutched tightly, was a single, unlit candle. No one knew why she hadn't fled. Perhaps she was trying to save her work. Perhaps she was praying. Perhaps she thought the candles would protect her, as they always had. The townsfolk built a shrine from her melted shop, and for years after, people swore that the candles sold in that street burned longer and steadier than any others. So tonight, if a candle glows softly beside your bed, let it flicker in peace. Let it remember nothing but warmth, and let Agnes rest. The jester who mocked the wrong man. The court jester was a strange figure, half entertainer, half truth-teller, wrapped in colors and mischief, walking the fine line between delight and danger. In the court of King Hadrian, there was one such man, Geoffrey the Loud. He was small, wiry, and merciless in his wit. His laughter echoed in the rafters, and his barbs were legend. He insulted everyone, nobles, knights, even the queen, and somehow he survived it all. It was said that as long as he made the king laugh, his place was safe. But one winter night, during a particularly tense feast, Geoffrey took it too far. Perhaps he was drunk. Perhaps the room was too quiet. Whatever the cause, he aimed his jokes at a visiting lord, a grim, heavy man with a crooked eye and a darker past. The room went still. The lord did not laugh. Later that night, Geoffrey was found in the courtyard, lying face down in the snow. No wounds, no blood, only a smear of frost on his lips, and his jester's cap resting neatly beside him. Some said it was poison. Others suspected the lord had friends in dark corners, but the king never asked questions. A week later, a new jester appeared, quieter, gentler. The jokes were softer, and the court no longer laughed quite so loud. So tonight, as your dreams drift quietly into the dark, remember the jester who laughed a little too boldly, and let your own silence be gentle. For in every court, in every heart, there is a line, and it is often unseen. The Death in the Bell Tower. High above the town square stood the bell tower, tall and solemn, its bronze bell marking time with dignity and dread. It rang for weddings, for feasts, and for death. The bell ringer, a man named Elias, lived in a small room just beneath the belfry. He had no family, no friends, only the bell. Each day, he climbed the long spiral stair and stood in silence until the rope called him to move. The townsfolk said he could hear the voices of the departed in the chime. One stormy evening, lightning cracked across the sky, and wind moaned through the alleys like a wolf. The bell rang unexpectedly, a single, low tone that rattled the windows. The next morning, they found Elias in the tower, lying beside the great rope, one hand still curled around it. His face was calm, peaceful. The doctor said it was the heart, old, overworked, perhaps startled by the storm. But some said he heard something that night, something only the bell could have told him. They buried him beneath the tower, and from then on, the bell never rang alone. It always echoed, a second sound, soft and low, like a whisper behind the chime. So tonight, if you hear a bell in your dreams, let it pass. It is only time turning its page, and Elias still listening. The tailor's fatal thread. In a quiet village nestled among foggy hills, there lived a tailor named Bernard, a man whose fingers were quick and whose patience was unmatched. He stitched clothes for nobles and peasants alike, and he was known to say that a good seam could hold the world together. But Bernard had a habit, a nervous one. He liked to hold pins in his mouth while he worked. His apprentices warned him. His wife scolded him, but he always smiled and said, "The thread knows the way." One spring morning, while hemming a particularly heavy cloak, Bernard leaned forward, muttered to himself, and gasped. The pin had slipped down his throat. He coughed, choked, staggered. By the time the others reached him, it was too late. The little silver pin, so useful, so small, had undone the tailor himself. They buried him with his shears and his measuring string, and no tailor in that village ever held pins in their mouth again. So tonight, let your tools rest. Let the thread wait, and let your own hands be still. The Bishop and the Bees. In the blooming countryside of a gentle spring, when the air was thick with flowers and the hum of wings, a bishop named Aldwin sought solitude. He was a man of scripture, yes, but also of gardens, a quiet soul who believed the earth could be read like a sacred book. His most beloved companions were his bees. They lived in neat rows of wooden hives behind the monastery, their paths precise, their rhythm soothing. Each morning, Bishop Aldwin would walk among them in silence, murmuring prayers not for safety, but for gratitude. The monk said he spoke to the bees more tenderly than he ever did to men. One morning, Aldwin did not return. The bell rang. The meal was served. Still, he did not come. They found him slumped beside the hives, his robes still neat, his face serene. His body bore dozens of stings, his hands folded on his chest. It seemed that, for reasons unknown, the bees had turned. Some said it was a change in the weather. Others whispered of a rival monk who had disturbed the hives before dawn. But most believed it was simply nature, reminding even the gentle of her temper. The hives were sealed, the garden overgrown. But each spring, wild bees still returned to the monastery walls, humming softly beneath the stained glass windows. So tonight, as the world hums gently outside your door, remember Bishop Aldwin. For even sweetness carries a sting, and silence sometimes speaks last. Death in the privy. There are dignified deaths, solemn ones, and deaths whispered with reverence. And then there is the tale of Sir Hugo of Northumbria, a knight known for boasting, drinking, and making unfortunate choices. Sir Hugo was strong, broad-shouldered, and deeply proud of his appetite. He ate more than 3 men, drank more than 4, and laughed louder than 5. But in the winter of 1327, his feast caught up with him. One cold morning, after a night of overindulgence, Sir Hugo excused himself to the castle's privy, a small chamber overhanging the moat, used for nature's quietest matters. It was, by design, not glamorous. But that day, the boards gave way. Perhaps it was the frost, perhaps his weight. The wood splintered, and with a shout, Sir Hugo disappeared into the muck below. The servants rushed. The knight stood stunned, but he did not emerge. They say the fall did not kill him. The cold did, or the shame, or the sheer surprise. Either way, his body was pulled from the moat hours later, still clad in fine velvet, soaked in indignity. The king forbade further jokes, but the people whispered them anyway. And so, dear listener, as you rest in your own time, with warm pipes and quiet walls, be thankful for small modern mercies. For once, not long ago, a knight was undone by a hole in the floor. The Alchemist and the Elixir. In a cluttered chamber filled with copper coils, cracked glass, and half-burnt manuscripts, an alchemist named Reynold chased immortality. He was clever, some said, mad, others whispered, but all agreed he was relentless. He believed the secret to eternal life lay in the perfect elixir, a golden draught that could defy death itself. For years he tested herbs, metals, and minerals. He dissolved sapphires. He boiled mercury. He inhaled fumes that turned his fingernails blue. And then, one stormy evening, he cried out in triumph. The neighbors heard him shouting, laughing, chanting psalms and riddles. They watched through the windows as he raised a bubbling vial to his lips and drank. Moments later, he collapsed. When they found him, the room still steamed, and the elixir glowed faintly on the floor. No one dared touch it. The smell alone made their eyes water. Reynold's notes were mostly destroyed, his formulas unreadable. But for years afterward, scholars searched for the recipe, hoping it was real. Some still do, but the villagers say the elixir worked, in a way, for Reynold's name never faded, and his death became a kind of legend. So tonight, if you dream of transformation, let it be gentle. Let mystery stay in bottles, and let death, when it comes, come softly, not stirred. The scribe and the inkstone, deep within the walls of a monastery Nestled between cold gray cliffs, Brother Siren spent his days in silence, bent over parchment, recording psalms and genealogies in ink so dark it was said to last 1,000 years. His fingers were always stained, his eyes red-rimmed from candlelight, but he was content. He loved his ink. Made it himself, grinding rare stones, mixing soot with vinegar and oak gall. Some monks said he muttered spells over it. Others swore they'd seen him dip his quill in blood. One winter evening, as the winds howled against the abbey doors, Brother Siren collapsed at his desk. His lips were dark. His breath was shallow. And beside him sat an overturned inkstone. The apothecary examined it quietly. The ink, it seemed, had turned toxic. A reaction, perhaps, from a new mineral he'd added. It had stained not only his quill, but his cup. A sip taken by mistake, or by curiosity, and that was the end. The manuscript was finished. Perfect. His final page was an illumination of death, drawn in red, gold, and deep black. The abbey sealed the inkstone in a box and buried it under the chapel floor. So, if you write tonight, let your ink be safe, your words be kind. And remember Brother Siren, whose words outlived him, and whose silence did too. The glass blower's breath. In a village near the sea, where the fog came in like a thief each dawn, there lived a glass blower named Elric. He made windows for churches, baubles for nobles, beads for the market stalls. But more than anything, he loved color, red, blue, gold, that shimmered like fire. He breathed life into molten glass, shaping orbs and angels and fragile birds. His lungs, once strong, began to tire. He coughed often, wore gloves, ignored the warnings. One morning, as he shaped a glowing sphere into a chalice, he exhaled too long, and the glass shattered in his hands. The shards caught his face, his throat. Some said one pierced his neck clean and quick. Others believed it was the years of breathing in the dust, the heat, the fumes, that his body had simply reached its end. They buried him with a glass rose on his chest, wrapped in blue silk. His shop was closed, the furnace extinguished. But on foggy mornings, villagers still find bits of colored glass on the shore, shaped like tears, glinting in the tide. So if you see one in your dreams, know it came from Elric, a man who gave the world color and took its breath into his own, the death of the mapmaker. In a quiet tower perched above a sprawling marsh, where the sky and water met in mirrored silence, a mapmaker named Emmerich traced the world with trembling hands. He had never left his homeland, never crossed the rivers, or climbed the mountains he drew. But he knew their names, their shapes, their secrets, or so he claimed. He worked alone, hunched over vellum, scratching roads and coastlines with infinite care. He believed deeply that the world could be captured perfectly, that with enough ink and patience, every rock, every tree, every curve of the earth could be preserved on a single sheet. His maps were beautiful, painstaking, impossible. One winter's night, Emmerich announced he had finished it. The complete map, not of just one kingdom, but of the entire known world. Towns drawn to scale, rivers etched like veins, mountains crowned in silver leaf. It was, he whispered, so perfect that to look upon it too long could drive a man to madness. He died that night, at his desk. They found him slumped over the parchment, a quill still in his hand, eyes open in what some described as awe or terror. No mark of illness, no sign of struggle. Only the map, face down beneath his body. They burned the page, fearing sorcery, or perhaps fearing something simpler, that it had been too good, too exact, too real. No one mapped the marshes again. So tonight, as you drift toward the edges of your own mind, let your maps be rough. Let the unknown remain so. For sometimes, what we draw too clearly may be what draws us away. The piper's last note, he was called the Black Piper, not for his clothes, but for the haunting music he played. A man of the roads, always moving, always barefoot, with a wooden flute carved from yew and stained dark with use. No one knew his name. No one knew his past. He would appear in villages without warning, play a song that made even the hardest weep, and disappear before dawn. They said he had been cursed by a fae, or touched by grief so deep it could only be spoken in sound. One autumn, he came to a town stricken by plague. The people were silent, doors closed, faces pale behind shuttered windows. And still, the piper played. He stood in the square, under the bare branches of a sycamore, and played a song so slow, so strange, that the air itself seemed to pause. The next morning, they found him sitting at the base of the tree, his flute across his lap, his head bowed. He was cold, still, gone. But none of the villagers fell ill after that. The plague passed, no one knew why. They buried him beneath the sycamore. No name, just a carving of a flute. And every year, when the leaves fall and the wind blows just right, some say they hear a tune rising faintly from the square. A song of endings, a lullaby for the sick and the strange. So if a melody haunts your sleep tonight, do not fear it. It may be the piper, passing through, playing once more for those who still listen, the sailor and the stone. In a coastal village battered by wind and salt, lived a sailor named Corwin. Broad-shouldered, weathered, and fond of tales, he claimed to have survived tempests, shipwrecks, and even sirens. But his most treasured story was of the stone. It was smooth, the size of a clenched fist, shot through with swirls of green and gray. He said he found it on an island no map could name, buried beneath the sand, warm even in the coldest months. He carried it, always, slept with it, beside him, rubbed it before sailing. Some said it brought luck. Others said it watched. One morning, Corwin was found dead in his bunk aboard a docked ship, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sign of wound or illness. The stone was clenched tightly in his palm, his fingernails driven so deep into his own hand that blood stained the wood below. The crew threw the stone into the sea, but it washed up on the shore the next day. No one touched it. They buried it in a box of iron, weighted with chains. The next storm cracked the cliffside in half. So tonight, if you find something strange and beautiful, leave it where it lies. Some treasures are meant to stay lost, and some stones carry stories better left untold. The seamstress's thread. Marian was a seamstress of unmatched skill. Her gowns rippled like water, her embroidery shimmered like frost. People traveled miles to buy her work, not only for its beauty, but for the strange peace that seemed to settle in the seams. She claimed to sing her stitches into being. Each garment, she said, held a little song, a little spell, a little something more. But one winter, she worked on a wedding gown for a noble's daughter, a commission of great weight and expectation. The fabric was imported, the pearls handpicked, and the thread was said to be woven from the hair of the bride's late mother. Superstition, most said. Sentiment, others. Marian worked without rest for days. Her fingers bled. Her song grew softer. She was found beside the finished gown, collapsed at her work table, lips still moving faintly. Her final breath, some believed, was sewn into the bodice. The bride refused to wear it. The gown was hung in the chapel, behind glass. No dust ever settled on it. And to this day, those who stand too long in front of it swear they hear a whisper of needle and thread, of breath, of lullaby. So tonight, may your dreams be stitched gently with thread meant only for sleep and none for sorrow, the shepherd and the sky. There was a boy no older than 16 who tended sheep on a high, lonely hill. His name was Edric. He carried no weapon, no coin, only a reed pipe and a cloak stitched by his mother. He was not remarkable, except in one thing. He loved the sky. He would lie on the grass for hours, watching clouds turn, stars blink, storms gather. He swore he could read omens in the winds, names in the thunder. One evening, as the sun set in a bruised sky, he began to speak aloud, to the clouds, to the heavens, to something no one else could see. He stood, arms wide, and laughed. And then he was gone. The sheep scattered. The pipe was found on the ground, his cloak too, but no footprints, no blood, just silence. They searched for days. Nothing. Some said he was taken by spirits. Others said the wind swallowed him whole, but the hill was quiet after that. No birds sang. The grass did not grow. Years later, a shepherd's daughter claimed to see a boy standing on the ridge during storms, barefoot, smiling, looking up. So, if you dream tonight of sky and wind, of stars that seem too close, let it pass, and let Edric watch alone, where no one follows. The death of the bell founder. In a soot-darkened village, wrapped in snow and ash, nestled between the hills like a forgotten ember, there stood a forge whose windows always glowed. Even in winter, when the river froze and breath turned silver, the fire within never dimmed. It was here that a man named Gervais worked, a bell founder, a craftsman of enormous repute, and a soul married to metal. Not blacksmith, not mason, not carpenter, but something else entirely. One who could summon sound from silence. One who shaped the very voice of the air. Gervais believed that bells had spirits. He said each one chose its pitch, its tone, its life. The metal was only part of it. The rest came from timing, from prayer, from the heat of the moment it was born. He poured molten bronze, as others might plant seeds, with reverence and patience, and never once, in all his years, did one of his bells ring false. The monks from far-off abbeys came to him. So did the nobles from distant manors. Each brought with them gold and parchment and requests laced with pride. A bell to mark a wedding, a bell for a cathedral tower, a bell to toll during war. Gervais nodded, never spoke too much. His ears were tuned more to fire than to words. But one year, he took on a commission larger than any before. A bell, not for church or crown, but for a city. It was to hang in the great tower at the city's heart and call out over the rooftops every morning and every dusk. It was to weigh more than a dozen oxen, engraved with holy verses and cast with gold filings in its alloy. A bell to last 1,000 years. And so Gervais worked, day into night, night into day. He slept in the foundry, beneath the crucibles and chains. The villagers saw his shadow through the flames and heard the strike of his hammer long after midnight. They said he murmured to the molds as if urging the metal not to fail him. On the morning of the pour, that sacred, terrible moment when molten bronze would descend into the waiting mold, Gervais stood alone. His apprentices had been sent away. He wanted no one near. Perhaps he knew something. Perhaps he simply needed silence. The mold was ready. The fire roared. He pulled the crucible forward, its contents glowing white-hot, trembling with power. But the earth is not always steady, nor is time always kind. A crack formed, small at first and silent, then wider, then splitting like a struck bell. The mold failed. The bronze poured too fast. The metal surged across the floor like a living thing, hungry, burning, wild. Gervais moved, but not quickly enough. The wave caught him at the knees. He fell. The fire licked higher. By the time the others reached him, the forge was still. The bell had never been cast, and Gervais was gone, beneath the scorched edge of what would have been his masterpiece, his skin darkened, his arms outstretched as if in offering. They buried what remained of him beneath the foundry floor. The city never received its bell. The forge was sealed, and still, on certain cold mornings, the townsfolk claim they hear a low, humming tone, not ringing exactly, but waiting. So tonight, if you hear a soft sound in the quiet, a tone without a source, a vibration in the stillness, it may be nothing. Or it may be the voice of a bell that was never born. Gervais's bell, one that still echoes, even though it never rang. The cobbler's final shoe. At the end of a crooked lane paved with uneven stones, where moss grew thick between timbered walls and the light fell soft and dim, lived a cobbler named Adric. His shop was narrow and leaning, with a wooden sign above the door shaped like a worn-out boot. Inside, the scent of leather and beeswax lingered like a memory, and the dust danced in the sunbeams like old ghosts. Adric had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. His hair was gray and always neatly combed. His spectacles hung from a loop of twine. He was not particularly chatty, But he had a quiet dignity, the kind that comes from knowing one's craft and asking little from the world. He made shoes for all: children with muddy feet, farmers with twisted boots, even a noble or two who stumbled across his shop and left with better soles than any royal cobbler could have cut. But Adric's shoes were different. There were whispers, never spoken too loudly, that his shoes lasted longer than they should, that they molded to the foot like old friends, that people who wore them sometimes walked in ways they never expected, down roads they hadn't meant to take, to places they didn't recognize and yet somehow needed to see. No one accused Adric of witchcraft. He was too kind, too tired, too small. But some wondered. One autumn, a stag was struck by lightning just outside the village. Its antlers burned, its hide was scorched, and its eyes, they said, still held fire when they closed them. Adric asked for the hide. The butcher gave it freely, eager to be rid of such a thing. For weeks after, the cobbler's shop remained closed. Shutters drawn, chimney smoking day and night. When he opened again, he had only one pair of shoes displayed in the window. Boots, tall and narrow, dark, with a strange shimmer in the leather. No buckles, no laces, no price. The villagers asked who they were for. Adric said nothing. That night, he closed early, lit a single candle, and put the boots on. Slowly, reverently, like a knight putting on armor. He stood, walked to the door, opened it wide, and stepped out into the moonlight. He was never seen again. The next morning, the shop was empty, clean. The sign had been taken down. No shoes, no tools, no dust. Only a single note carved into the inside of the doorframe. To walk is to remember. Weeks later, a traveler claimed to find a pair of boots at the edge of the great forest. Empty, neatly placed, still warm. No one claimed them. So tonight, dear listener, if you dream of walking a road you don't recognize, and your feet feel lighter than they should, perhaps it's best not to look down. Let the path take you where it will, and let Adric lead just a few steps ahead. The cook and the poison feast. In the long, low hall of a manor that had stood for generations, its beams carved with lions and vines and stories no one could quite remember, preparations were underway for a winter feast. The larder was full, the fires were stoked, the snow outside had finally stopped, and in the heart of the kitchen, sleeves rolled, cheeks red from the heat, stood Berta, the cook. Berta was not a young woman, nor a beautiful one, nor particularly genteel, but she was beloved. Her food was hearty, her hands strong, and her laughter, when it came, sounded like bread cracking open after a long bake. She had worked in that kitchen since she was a girl, and now she ruled it like a gentle queen. On the day of the feast, nobles arrived from all corners. Furs brushed the floors, jewels glinted in firelight. Servants rushed, dogs barked, and Berta, undistracted, stirred her pots with the precision of a conductor. She had prepared her famous venison stew. Rich, wine dark, spiced with pepper and cloves, thickened with root vegetables pulled from the frozen earth. As tradition demanded, she tasted everything before it left the hearth. She dipped her spoon, blew gently, sipped, and nodded. But there was also a pie. It was meant as a garnish, a side dish, barely mentioned, filled with herbs and soft cheese, nestled in a flaky crust. The herbs had been gathered early, in a patch of ground where the frost had not yet reached, a hopeful place. But sometimes, hope grows close to danger. Among the parsley and mint had crept something else. Something small, dark, shaped like a tear. Belladonna, nightshade. The pie reached the table. A slice was offered to Berta. She ate it without thought. By the time the guests began to speak of her stew, how rich and deep it tasted, how warm it made them feel, Berta was leaning against the wall, her spoon dropped, her breath shallow. She was gone before the fire even dimmed. There was no scandal. The Lord declared her death a tragedy. A marker was placed beneath the kitchen's hearthstone. Her pie was not blamed. The guests finished their stew. But the recipe was never written down again. And no cook in that manner has baked a pie with fresh herbs since. So tonight, as your supper settles warm in your belly, remember that even comfort can carry risk, and that even the gentlest hands may one day stir their final pot. May your dreams be full and safe, the widow and the well. In the far corner of a damp little village, where the rooftops bowed beneath the weight of moss, and the wind moved like an old breath through broken shutters, lived a woman named Isabet. She was old, or so they assumed, though no one knew her age for certain. She had always been there. When the baker's son was born, when the old chapel collapsed, when the sheep vanished for 3 days and returned with their wool oddly plaited, Isabet was there. Her house leaned like a tired man, its door askew, its garden overgrown with herbs no one else dared grow. Rue, foxglove, mugwort, boneset. She kept to herself, spoke only when spoken to, dressed in the same black shawl, the same heavy skirts. But each morning, just as the sky turned from soot to ash, she walked to the well. It sat beyond the village edge, past the last fence, surrounded by a circle of stones. Most used the newer pump, built by the Carpenters' Guild. But not Isabet. She carried her pail, wooden, bound with iron, and her steps made no sound. At the well, she would kneel. Sometimes she drew water. Sometimes she simply sat. Some swore she spoke, in a low, lilting tongue that didn't belong to any part of the realm. Others claimed she sang lullabies, songs for things that hadn't been born in centuries. And then, one morning, she did not return. The sun rose. The baker kneaded his dough. The bell rang for midday, still no Isabet. Her door was shut. Her shawl still hung on its peg. Her shoes were gone. They waited 3 days. Then the bravest boys, full of bravado and nerves, crept out to the well. They found her pail, her shoes, no footprints in the frost, no disturbance in the dirt, just the well, silent, black, waiting. A few leaned over, called her name, but the echo came back wrong, not like sound, but like memory. The priest said prayers. The carpenter boarded the well shut, hammering thick planks across its mouth. But at night, the boards creaked, whispered, misted over, even when no breath touched them. The well was forgotten, then remembered, then ignored again. Grass grew up over the stones. The children stopped telling stories. But now and again, on certain misty mornings, someone finds a pail by their doorstep, wooden, old, full of clear, cold water. No one drinks it, but no one throws it away. So tonight, dear listener, if your dreams bring you to the edge of a forest, or to a field where the ground feels unusually soft, and a well sits alone in the mist, be kind. Nod once. Then turn back. Isabet has already drawn what she needs. The plague doctor's mask. It was during the darkest days of the plague, when even the church bells rang without pause, and the air itself seemed heavy with endings, that he arrived. No carriage, no horse, no company. Just the crunch of his boots on gravel and the quiet rustle of fabric. He wore black, a long coat waxed against rot, gloves drawn tight, and upon his face the mask beaked like a bird of omen. The children hid, the elders crossed themselves, but he said nothing. The villagers called him Corvinus. Whether he offered that name or whether it was given to him, no one knew. He slept in the abandoned inn. He worked by day and by candlelight, never removing his mask. Not to drink, not to eat, not even in sleep. When his shallow breath hissed faintly from behind the glass, he treated the sick, gently, without fear. He carried bundles of herbs, lavender, wormwood, rosemary, and hung them in windows, burned sulfur in doorways, scribbled symbols in chalk across thresholds. Some thought him a charlatan, others a saint, but the dying slowed, then stopped, and when the last fever passed, when the village dared once again to breathe, they brought bread and wine to his door in thanks. But he was gone. The mask remained, left upon the doorstep like a story too heavy to carry any further. The bed had not been slept in. The candle still burned. They buried the mask beneath the chapel floor. And for years, the earth above it grew strange flowers, white, star-shaped, with petals that shimmered faintly in moonlight. No one named them. No one picked them. So tonight, if your dreams lead you to a narrow path, and you meet a figure in black with a voice that sounds like wind through dry reeds, do not run. Simply listen. Some doctors leave no graves, only quiet, the scribe of forgotten names. In the forgotten wing of an abbey tucked between two rivers and a field of pale violets, there lived a scribe named Benoit. He did not copy scripture. He did not bind books for kings. His task was quieter, stranger, and perhaps heavier than any other. He was charged with writing the names of the forgotten. The abbey kept a ledger, a book of deep red leather with pages so thin they trembled. Into it, Benoit recorded names spoken to him by travelers, pilgrims, beggars, names without tombstones, without family, without even the echo of a prayer left in the world. Each night, by candlelight, he dipped his quill in ink so dark it looked like spilled sleep. And he wrote, Jacobin the Cartwright, Eleonora of the Lowlands, the boy with no voice, Sister Amos, who left no shadow. He never crossed out a name, never erased. He said to erase was to bury twice. One night, a storm rolled in. One of those strange, low storms that seemed to rattle the world from the inside. The abbey shook, the chapel groaned, candles flickered, and Benoit kept writing. When dawn came, the monks found his chamber silent. The candle still burned, the book lay open, and Benoit sat slumped in his chair, his hand frozen around the quill. The final name? No one could read it. Not Latin, not French, not even letters as they knew them. Just a curve, a whisper on the page. They closed the book and locked it in the vault. But sometimes, deep in the stone of the abbey, the sound of a quill can be heard, scratching, slowly, as if someone is still remembering. So tonight, if a name rises unbidden in your dreams, a name you do not know, a name you've never spoken, speak it softly. You may be helping someone find their way home. The dyer's last color, in a narrow alley, choked with steam and strange scents, where the walls dripped with dye and the cobblestones were permanently stained blue, there lived a man named Guylon, the master dyer of Rue Sainte Marguerite. His hands were always marked with color, fingertips red as berries, palms purple, knuckles green from the vats he stirred daily. He was a quiet man, with deep eyes and little interest in the world beyond the pigments he brewed. Madder root, woad, crushed shells, even rare saffron. He worked with them all. He believed that color was more than beauty. He said it was a kind of memory, a hidden language, a soul made visible. One day, a merchant from the east brought him a gift, a powdered dye so rich and dark it shimmered like oil in sunlight. No name, the merchant said, no origin, just rare. Guylon, enchanted, set to work. He mixed the powder into water, then into oil, then into vinegar, trying to bind it, tame it. The color changed each time, blue, then green, then something between the two. A shade that didn't quite belong to the world. He dipped a scrap of linen in it, watched, waited. Then, overcome by curiosity, he did something he'd never done before. He tasted it, just a finger, just a touch. By morning, the vat was cold. The shop was silent. Guylon was found beside his bench, his hands still bright with the new color, though his skin had turned oddly pale, tinged slightly with green. The dye vanished. No one found the vial. The merchant was never seen again. But sometimes, in hidden corners of old cloth halls, a piece of linen is found with that same strange hue, deep, unnameable, unsettling. So tonight, if your dreams are painted in colors you've never seen, let them pass. Some shades are not meant for waking hours. Some were made for Guylon, and Guylon alone, the gardener's whisper. The monastery garden was not grand, just rows of herbs and flowers, a few gnarled trees, and a stone bench that had cracked long before memory began. But it was tended with deep care by Brother Theo, a monk who rarely spoke and never raised his voice, not even in prayer. His hands were earthy, rough, always carrying the scent of lavender, thyme, and damp soil. He believed that plants responded to kindness, that they grew differently when spoken to gently. Each morning, he walked the rows barefoot, humming under his breath. He was most fond of the roses, white ones. He said they held secrets. He said they remembered things people had long since forgotten. One spring, something strange happened. A new plant grew in the corner of the garden, slender, with dark leaves and a single blood-red bloom. Brother Theo said nothing, but began tending to it with special attention. He refused to say where it came from, refused to let others near. One evening, after Vespers, he remained in the garden alone. The others left him humming softly beneath the stars. By morning, he was found at the base of the strange plant, eyes closed, face peaceful. There were no marks, no illness, just a faint smear of red at the corner of his mouth, the same color as the bloom. They buried him beneath the garden, near the cracked bench. The strange plant withered, never bloomed again. But the white roses, the ones he loved, began to open wide, larger than before, glowing faintly in the moonlight. So, if you dream tonight of gardens, of scent and shadow, of something blooming just beyond the fence, be still. Let Brother Theo tend it. Some plants belong to silence. The falconers fall. In a high tower overlooking a fog-draped forest, where the trees were so tall their tips vanished into cloud, lived a falconer named Sir Elwyn. He was a knight once, but gave up the sword for birds. Creatures, he claimed, who understood freedom better than men ever would. He trained hawks, kestrels, eagles, but none as fiercely as his peregrine, Mira. She was silver gray, fast as wind, loyal only to him. She'd been hatched in his hands, raised on his shoulder, never kenneled. They were inseparable. It was said he spoke to her in whispers, and that she answered not in voice, but in look, in turn, in tilt of wing. One morning, just before dawn, Elwyn took Myra to the tower's peak, the highest perch in the valley. He set her free, as he had hundreds of times. But this time, she didn't circle. She flew out, farther, higher, out of sight. He waited, called, waited. Hours passed, and then, at sunset, she returned. Like a bolt of lightning, she dove, not to his glove, but at his chest. No one knows why. Some say her heart had turned wild. Others say she saw something we couldn't. She struck. He staggered, fell from the tower without a word. When they found him, his body was untouched by the falcon's talons. Only the fall had broken him. Mira sat beside him, silent, still. She flew away at dawn, never returned. So tonight, if a bird calls in your dream, high, sharp, urgent, let it fly. Some bonds, once stretched too far, return in strange ways. The minstrel's unfinished song. There was once a minstrel who traveled with no home but the road, and no name but the one he gave to the wind. Some called him Corin, others Relis, and still others just the boy with the silver strings. He was young, pale-eyed, with a voice like rain on slate, quiet but insistent. He played not for coin, but for memory. His songs were not tavern jests or courtly ballads, but stories wrapped in melody, strange tunes, slow and low, that made old women weep and children go still. He said each song was borrowed, whispered to him in dreams, and that when he sang them, the souls who told them could finally rest. One spring evening, he arrived in a village that had not heard music in years. They'd buried their last bard in a patch of untamed heather and let the lute go silent. But Corin sat by the fountain in the square, plucked a few notes, and the townsfolk gathered slowly, drawn not by the sound, but the quiet between the notes. He sang of a knight who vanished into the sea, of a bride who married a star, of a tree that remembered every child who climbed it. Then he stopped, mid-note, mid-line, and never moved again. He was still upright, still holding the lute, but his eyes had closed gently, as though sleep had taken him mid-thought. No wound, no cry, just stillness. They buried him beside the fountain. The villagers tried to finish the song he'd started. No one could. Every time they played it, the last line slipped away, forgotten as soon as it formed. Now, some say the wind hums it on still nights. Others say it plays only once, for each listener, and then is lost. So tonight, if a melody drifts through your dream, soft, half-finished, don't chase it. Let it end where it must. Not all songs want to be complete. The tapestry that took a life. In a great manor house where ivy swallowed windows and tapestries lined every hallway like silent witnesses, there lived a woman named Helene. She was a noble woman of modest means but great patience. Her fingers were rarely still. She wove not just curtains or gowns, but full, sweeping stories in thread. Tapestries that hung from beam to beam, thick with scenes of forests, ships, wolves, weddings, and stars. She said her dreams told her what to make, and she always obeyed. One year, she began a new piece. She would not say what it was, only that it came to her in fragments, flashes of gold and blood and bone. The servants noticed she stopped eating, stopped sleeping, worked even in the dark. She bled into the thread once and didn't notice. The tapestry grew enormous. It spanned one entire hall, from hearth to ceiling. No one was allowed to look at it until it was done. Then, one morning, she opened the chamber door and called her household in. They found her lying beneath the tapestry, draped like a shroud. Her face was calm, her hands folded, her needle still threaded with the final color, black. The tapestry showed a woman, alone, cloaked in shadow, walking through a field of faceless watchers. Above her, a sky cracked open. Something stared down, something with no name. They tried to remove it. The thread snapped. The cloth tore itself. Eventually, they sealed the room. No one spoke of Helene after that, but the dreams returned. To her nieces, to the chambermaids, to the steward who kept the keys. So tonight, if you see a pattern while you sleep, repeating, curling, pulling at your vision, don't follow the thread. Let it fray. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. The candlemaker's glow. In the foggy heart of a village hemmed in by low hills and endless moor, there lived a candlemaker named Aldith. Her candles were said to burn longer than any others, and some claimed they never truly went out, only waited. She infused them with herbs, with wax, drawn from her own bees, and something else, something no one ever identified. Her shop smelled of honey and rosemary, but also something faintly metallic, like rain on stone. She lit one candle each night and sat beside it until dawn, watching, listening. The townsfolk assumed she was lonely, but Aldith said the flames spoke. One evening, she crafted a candle unlike the rest, tall, thin, carved with runes from a language no one recognized. She placed it in the window and lit it with a silver taper. The flame rose straight and green. People gathered, quietly. At midnight, her shop went dark. By morning, the windows were cold, the door unlocked. But Aldith was gone, not vanished, not quite. Her cloak was folded neatly, her slippers side by side, her final candle still burning, though there was no wax left to fuel it. It flickered once, went out. Her shop was left untouched, and sometimes, in deep winter, the windows glow faintly, though no candle burns within. So, if your room glows unexpectedly in your dream tonight, leave it, turn away. Some lights are not for following. The silent duel. They were two knights, Renaud and Estienne, bound by feud so old no one remembered its spark. Some said it was love, others land. Some even whispered it began over a spilled goblet and an insult that grew teeth. But no matter its origin, it was a hatred sharpened over decades. In the frost-bitten month of January, they agreed to settle it once and for all. A duel, but not with swords or lances, something quieter. Words. They would meet, alone, in the great stone hall. No seconds, no witnesses, no blades. Just talk. At dawn, the servants opened the doors. Both men were seated, still, frozen in posture, eyes open. No marks, no sign of struggle. But between them sat a scroll. One line written on it, repeated over and over, each in a different hand. The phrase was never made public. The scroll was burned. Some say the duel was not verbal, but something else. Thought, curse, memory. A battle of wills too heavy for the flesh to carry. So, if you find yourself face to face with someone in your dream, not speaking, not moving, just waiting, step back. That duel is not yours. Let it remain unfinished. The watchmaker who stopped time. In a town where every hour was counted and every minute marked with bells, lived a watchmaker named Luke. He kept no apprentice, trusted no one with his craft, and wore 3 timepieces at all times. One for the present, one for what had passed, and one for what hadn't yet happened. He claimed he could hear time breathing. One night, he locked himself in his workshop. The clocks inside struck midnight in perfect harmony, and then never ticked again. They found Luke at his bench, head bowed over a half-assembled mechanism shaped like an hourglass with no sand. Every clock in town had stopped for one whole day. Then all resumed. Except Luke. He remained still, cold, his pocket watches ticking now in reverse. No one could explain it. The chapel bell rang for him, but 12 times backward. And since then, people sometimes report losing a single day, waking with memory of events that haven't yet occurred. So if you wake tomorrow and feel slightly out of place, don't worry. Luke may be working again. The gravedigger's guest. Milo was a gravedigger in a town that never stopped burying. War, plague, winter. He didn't mind. Said the silence of the dead was a blessing. He spoke to the graves as he dug, asked them questions, listened for answers, never laughed, never drank. One evening, he dug a grave too deep, kept digging. Said he found a chamber, a door. He left his tools and returned the next day, and never came back. They found the grave, but no bottom, just darkness, a depth that felt wrong. It filled slowly over years, the earth uneasy. Nothing grew there. Some say Milo opened something. Others say he was invited in. So if you dream tonight of stairs in the earth, don't descend. Some guests never leave. The knight who fought the wind. Sir Caddoc was noble, brave, foolish in the way only the lonely can be. He returned from every war, but never found peace. One night, he heard a voice in the wind, soft, female, distant, calling him. He rode out alone, sword drawn. They found his horse days later, riderless, saddle empty. Caddoc's armor was found in the woods, laid out as if for dressing. Clean, cold, his sword stuck in a tree. Some say the wind claimed him, or that he found something in it worth following. So tonight, if the wind speaks your name, stay inside. Caddoc is still listening, the pilgrim who walked nowhere. She had no name, only a walking stick, carved with stars, and a robe patched with every color. She arrived, prayed, and left. No destination, no map. One winter, she walked in a circle around the abbey for 9 days. When asked why, she said, to keep the world turning. On the 10th day, she sat, closed her eyes, and never rose again. The seasons changed oddly that year. Spring came early, then snow. Her stick still stands, rooted in stone. Blossoms from it in April. So if your dream tonight is a loop, don't be afraid. She's still walking. Somewhere. The sculptor beneath the stone. There was once a sculptor who lived on the edge of a quarry where the wind moaned through abandoned pits and the rock walls gleamed with veins of pale gold. His name was Master Rovain, and though his workshop was filled with dust and discarded marble, his hands were legendary. He carved not just saints and angels, but dreams. He gave emotion to stone, fear, joy, longing, things that most believed could never live in a face frozen by chisel. But Rovain never signed his works. He said it wasn't his name that mattered, but what the stone remembered. One winter, he received a commission from a distant bishop to carve an angel so lifelike that it would look like it might speak. Rovain accepted, though he warned that what the bishop asked for came with risks. He began to work on a slab of marble dug from the oldest part of the quarry. It was darker than most, almost silver in places, and it rang oddly when struck. For weeks, Rovain toiled in silence. He ate little, slept even less. The townsfolk said they saw candlelight burning through the night, and sometimes heard singing. Then, one morning, the workshop went quiet. When the bishop's men arrived, they found the angel finished, beautiful, eyes open, mouth slightly parted, wings spread as if mid-flight. But Rovain was gone. The floor beneath the statue was disturbed. Fresh stone dust, footprints that led nowhere. Some believed the sculptor had fallen into madness. Others said he'd become part of his work, literally, that somehow the marble had claimed him. No one ever touched the statue again. It was left standing in the empty workshop. And sometimes people say it shifts ever so slightly in the dark. So tonight, if a statue appears in your dream and seems to follow you with its eyes, be still. It may only be watching, or it may be Rovain, still carving, still listening. The apothecaries sleep in a crooked little shop on the back corner of a muddy square, where the rain always seemed to fall a little harder and the air smelled of mint and something faintly bitter, lived an apothecary named Elric. He was an old man, soft-spoken, with a white beard and a stooped back, and hands that moved like wind over water. He had a remedy for every ailment: coughs, fevers, heartbreak. His shelves were lined with labeled jars, powders, roots, dried beetles, even stones. But his most famous creation was his sleeping draught. It was gentle, warm, and gave dreams as soft as feathers. No nightmares, no tossing, just quiet rest. He said it was made from chamomile, poppy, and a single drop of something he never named. People came from distant towns to buy it. Even the local priest admitted he'd taken it once and seen angels with wings made of snow. Then, one rainy afternoon, Elric was found at his table, slumped peacefully in his chair, a warm cup of tea in his hand. He was smiling, still breathing. But he would not wake. Days passed. He remained asleep. The doctor was called, prayers were said, but Elric lay undisturbed, as though his dreams had simply grown more interesting than the world outside. He was eventually buried in his bed, the cup still on his table, the draft sealed away. But now and again, someone finds a jar with his mark, a single bottle, a faint scent of chamomile, and something else, something colder. So tonight, if you feel sleep take you a little faster than usual, don't worry. Just rest. Elric is still brewing, somewhere, in the quiet, the herald and the message. The castle was quiet, as castles often are after too many years and too few feasts. Its halls echoed more than they rang. The tapestries had faded, but one figure moved through its corridors with purpose: the herald, Thomas. He carried news from kingdom to kingdom, galloping through storms, frost, and the heavy air before battle. He wore no armor, only the royal colors. He never forgot a name, never misplaced a scroll, never stopped moving. Until one day, he returned. Not from war, or court, or treaty, but from somewhere else. No one knew where he'd been. His horse was dusted with ash, his cloak was torn, his eyes were strange. He said he had one final message, but no one ever heard it. He entered the throne room, unrolled a scroll, and fell to the floor. Gone. The scroll was blank. The king ordered silence. The scroll was burned. Tomas was buried in the royal crypt. Though he had no bloodline, no crest, Since then, messages sometimes arrive without messengers. Seals pressed into wax that no one can trace. Names spoken in the wind when no one is near. So if a message arrives in your dream tonight, sealed but unsigned, do not open it. Some words were not meant to be delivered. The Librarian's last volume. There was a library beneath a chapel, beneath a monastery, beneath a hill, so deep that even the candles burned differently, and at its center sat a librarian named Brother Amen. He was small, stooped, and covered in dust. No one knew when he'd begun his post. He was always there. He cataloged books no one read, titles with no authors, pages that shifted when turned. He said they were waiting to be needed. One year, a book arrived in no language anyone knew, bound in red velvet, edged in silver leaf. Amen smiled when he saw it. "Ah," he said, "this one." He took it to the deepest corner, sat down, opened it, and never stood again. They found him still seated, eyes closed, book open to a page that was blank. But in the candlelight, sometimes, symbols shimmered, shapes like stars. The monks sealed the book in a locked case. It hums softly. So if you find a book in your dream, unreadable, unmarked, place it back on the shelf. Let Brother Amen finish it, wherever he is, the bell ringer and the echo. She rang the chapel bell every evening, without fail. Her name was Ellen. Her hands were calloused, her back bent, but she never missed a day. She said the bell had to be rung exactly 13 times, not 12, not 14, to keep something asleep beneath the hills. Most thought her superstitious, a kind old woman. Then one day, the bell rang only 12 times. The villagers noticed. The priest climbed the tower. Elin was gone. The rope had snapped, but there was no sign of a fall, no body, only an echo. A 14th bell tone, long and low, that has never stopped. It hums in the hills, in the soil, in dreams. So tonight, if you hear a bell in the distance and it doesn't stop, pull the covers close. Ellen is listening, and perhaps still ringing. The weaver who wove the wind. In a village so small that its name was forgotten, even by those who lived there, where the paths were more often trodden by deer than by carts, there lived a woman named Lisette. Her cottage stood on a rise where the wind never slept, a wind that was said to whisper secrets if you stood still long enough. Lisette was a weaver, not just by trade, but by something deeper, something older. She worked a loom of her own making, fashioned from trees, struck by lightning, and strung with cords soaked in spring water and beeswax. No one else could use it, though a few had tried. The strings would not move. The frame would not yield. She claimed she wove not with wool or flax, but with the wind itself. That it left behind strands too fine to see, curling in corners, tangled in hedgerows, trailing from clouds like invisible ribbon. And each morning, at dawn, she would walk the hills and gather these threads. She caught them with carved hoops and fine combs, lifting them gently from air thick with mist and birdsong. The villagers thought her odd, but harmless, And when they passed by her cottage and saw the great sheets of cloth hung out to dry, shimmering, translucent, shifting in patterns that didn't match the breeze, they simply looked away. It was easier not to wonder too much. One autumn, as the winds turned sharp and the birds fled inland, Lizette began weaving something new. She worked through the night, candles flickering in every window, the glow seen far down the valley. The cloth was darker than her usual pieces, not silver or pearl or pale gold, but a gray so deep it seemed to fold the light around it. She spoke to it, some said, whispered as she wove. Others claimed they heard music, thin, high, sweet as bone chimes, though no one was brave enough to draw near. And then, one morning, she was gone. The door was ajar, the loom was still, the cottage was empty. All her cloths had vanished. Every sheet, every length, even the wind catchers on the hill. Only one thread remained, tied to the highest roof beam, drifting gently out the door and into the sky. Some say she followed the wind too far. Others believe she finally wove a passage into something beyond, a place where the air itself could hold her. Now, on certain nights, when the clouds hang low and the wind sings in strange patterns, people claim to see fabric rippling above the fields, delicate, invisible, moving as if hung between stars. So tonight, if you feel a tug at your sleeve while you dream, not rough, but curious, don't pull back. Let it flutter past. It may be Lizette, still weaving, still wandering, her threads too light for waking eyes. The midwife and the candlelight child, in the quiet borderlands between forest and fen, where the soil was soft and the mist came early, lived a midwife named Marin the Quiet. She had long since grown gray, her hands gnarled like old branches, her face soft with the memory of thousands of births. The people said she knew the language of pain and how to guide it safely into joy. She had delivered babes in barns and under trees, by firelight and starlight, in silence and in screams. The villagers trusted her more than priests, perhaps even more than God. But there were births she never spoke of, nights when she returned home with eyes red-rimmed and lips sealed. And there was one place she had never been summoned, the manor on the edge of the fen, where the candles never went out and the windows never opened. Until one winter night. The rider came at dusk, cloaked in fur, his face hidden. He said nothing but handed her a silver token marked with a symbol she didn't recognize, a crescent moon with thorns around it. Marin packed her satchel, said nothing, left without a goodbye. The manor was lit with hundreds of candles, all white, all steady, not a flicker. The halls were silent, the servants gone. Only the mother remained, pale, breath shallow, eyes wide as moons. She did not speak. Marin knelt beside her. Time slowed. The room pressed in. The child came swiftly. No cries, no sound. It blinked once, silver eyes, in a dark, dark face, and Marin's breath caught. She smiled, then fell backward, gone before she hit the floor. The child was cradled gently, wrapped in black velvet. The candles went out all at once. The next day, the rider returned Marin's satchel to the village. Her apron was folded, her tools cleaned. Her shawl smelled faintly of lavender. She was buried with her palms open, as if still offering something. Now, on nights when a baby is born under strange stars, midwives light a single white candle and whisper Marin's name, just once, before the birth begins. So tonight, if you dream of soft wailing, of breath wrapped in candlelight, and a name you don't remember, hold still. Marin may be close, watching, guiding, just as she always did. The Ink Eater. There is a room deep beneath the cathedral in the capital, colder than the crypts and older than the choir loft, lined with stone shelves and ink-stained benches. It was once the scriptorium, where monks and scribes copied books by hand, one letter at a time, their fingers cramped and their eyes red by candle's end. In this forgotten place worked a boy named Tolan. He was not a monk, nor even apprenticed. He'd simply stayed, found in a basket as an infant. He was raised among the ink pots and parchment scraps, taught letters before he was taught prayers. He did not speak much, but he read everything. The monks said he learned to write before he could walk, that he could memorize whole pages at a glance, that he knew when a text was lying, even when it was in Latin. He began to collect dried ink, the hard flakes left at the bottom of bottles, the dark residue scraped from long-dried quills. He ground them in a pestle and smeared them onto his fingertips, then licked them clean. When questioned, he said the words tasted like honey. At first, the monks laughed. Then they grew uneasy. The books he touched began to change, not visibly, but in meaning. Verses lost their rhythm. Names appeared that hadn't been there. The ink in the inkwells began to bubble when he entered the room. One morning, they found him curled in the corner, mouth stained black, eyes wide open. He was still breathing, still murmuring, but he would not wake. He clutched a parchment of his own making, covered in a language no one knew, not even the abbot. The letters moved when looked at too long. The page was burned, the room sealed, but sometimes black stains reappear on the walls, and if left alone, they begin to form words. No one reads them. So tonight, if a dream offers you a book with no title, and a boy with blackened lips smiles at you from the margins, close it gently. Set it down. Tolan is still writing. Somewhere deeper, the night of the empty helm. He rode into the village just as the sun began to bleed across the horizon. His armor the color of twilight, his helm blank. No crest, no slits, no insignia. Just a smooth curve of black metal that reflected nothing. He spoke to no one, ate nothing. His horse made no sound, its hooves barely striking the ground. They called him the Empty Helm. He appeared whenever something terrible was about to happen, a sickness, a fire, a landslide. Days before the calamity, he would arrive, ride once through the square, then vanish into the trees. No one ever saw where he went. No one ever followed. Until a boy did. The boy was 15, full of questions, certain he would become a knight himself. He waited outside the village with a lantern and a dagger. When the Empty Helm rode past, the boy followed. Days passed. The boy did not return, but the helm did. It was found resting gently against the chapel door, a single black feather placed inside. No horse, no rider, no sound. The disasters stopped after that. Now, the villagers keep the helm in the bell tower, covered, but not locked. Sometimes, the feather inside shifts. So tonight, if you dream of armor without a man, or a face without a voice, walk the other way. Some warnings wear no expression, and some riders never wish to return. The musician who played the fog. High on the cliffs above a roaring sea, where the mist rolled in like breath from another world, there stood a man with a flute. He came at dawn, played until dusk, then vanished into the fog as silently as he had come. No one knew his name. His cloak was sea-worn, his boots patched with driftwood. But his flute was carved from something no one could place, not bone, nor reed, nor wood. It shimmered faintly like shell. The songs he played were not like others. They had no melody, not in the way people understood it. They sounded like morning gulls, like ice cracking in spring, like a ship creaking under moonlight. The villagers listened from afar, never daring to approach. One morning, he played longer than usual. The fog crept closer than it ever had. It swallowed the cliff, the trees, the path. When it lifted, he was gone. Only the flute remained, standing upright in the grass, still warm. They buried it under a stone. But at certain times of year, when the mist returns with unnatural speed, when the tide moves out too fast, music echoes across the cliffs. Not loud, just enough to make you turn your head. Some say he became the fog. Others say he was never human at all. So tonight, if you hear a tune with no beginning and no end, drifting through your dream like salt on the wind, let it pass. Let the fog carry it. Let the final note fade. The musician has played his last song, and now so have we, the locksmith's last key. In a town surrounded by high walls and heavier secrets, there lived a locksmith named Jurin. He worked out of a cramped shop on a crooked lane, where the windows were always closed and the door never quite stayed shut. He was neither young nor old, neither liked nor disliked, just known. Jaron never advertised, never asked questions, and yet, somehow, he had keys to every door. Manor gates, cellar bolts, even the great lock on the old Abbey Tower. When someone asked how, he'd only say, "Locks like to talk. You just have to listen." He made keys that fit things no one could remember building, opened doors no one recalled closing. There were stories that he'd once forged a key that unlocked a man's dreams, or another that opened a chapel and found nothing inside but wind. But one day, Duran began crafting something different. A key without a lock. It was long and silver, with 7 teeth and a handle shaped like a serpent devouring its tail. He worked on it for days, polishing, filing, murmuring things too quiet to hear. When it was finished, he held it in his palm for a long time. Then he closed his shop, placed a sign on the door that read, simply, "Gone to turn it." And that was the last anyone saw of him. The shop stayed untouched, Dust settled gently on the benches. The drawers remained full of keys, rusted, golden, twisted, flat, none labeled. But the silver key was gone. People said he'd made it for himself, a key to some final place. Not heaven, not hell, something quieter, something in between. Now and then, on cold mornings, villagers find old doors slightly ajar, locks that have rusted shut for years found gently opened. No damage, just turned. And outside, a faint footprint in the frost. So tonight, if your dream brings you to a door you don't remember locking, and you feel a key in your hand you never made, go slow. Turn gently. It may be Jaren's door you're opening, and it may be your last. The sailor who sank in the sky. There was once a sailor named Oswin who had never been to sea. Born inland, raised among hills and dry wind, he spent his youth carving ships into driftwood and humming songs he said came from somewhere. Out there, he built a boat with his own hands, not for water, but for air. It was made of canvas and bone, wood and wax, with long arms that stretched like wings and sails stitched from linen soaked in milk and starlight. He said the stars would carry him, if only he could catch their wind. They laughed, of course, called him cracked, but Oswin didn't mind. He said the sky was just another kind of sea, and that he'd heard waves in the clouds on quiet nights. Then one evening, just before the moon rose, he launched. The boat lifted, slowly at first, then faster. Children screamed, dogs howled. The sails caught something unseen and the vessel soared, its shadow slipping over the chapel roof and into the dark. He was never seen again. Some say he fell. Others say he rose too far. But a week later, long after the laughter had died down, something strange happened. A rain fell, fine, silver, and light as lace. It didn't soak the ground. It simply shimmered. And in the fields outside town, someone found a feather. Not from bird or beast, but woven like rope, pale as moonlight. It smelled of salt. Now, on clear nights, people say they see a shape drifting across the stars. Not a bird, not a storm, but something in between. Moving slow, moving home. So tonight, if your dream feels unmoored, and you find yourself looking up, not down, don't be afraid. Oswin may be sailing past, his anchor still loose, his sails full of sky. Just wave once, and let him pass, the shepherd who followed the bell. High in the mountain pastures, where even the sky seemed quiet, there lived a shepherd named Alric. He had no family, no village, no chapel, only his sheep, the wind, and the sound of a single bell. It hung from the neck of his oldest ewe, a soft brass chime that rang just once each morning, and once again at dusk. Ulrich listened to that bell like it was the heartbeat of the world. He said it kept him on time, though there were no clocks. That it kept him safe, though the wolves still prowled. That it kept him company, though he had no need for words. Then, one summer, the bell began to ring at night. Once, then again, always from a distance. He would rise from his blanket by the fire, peer into the darkness. The sheep were asleep. The old ewe with the bell stood still. And yet, the sound had moved. It rang again. Farther this time, up the ridge, beyond the tree line. By the third night, Alric began to follow. Just a few steps, then more. He left no trail, said no word, took no food, just walked. In the morning, his sheep were untouched, but Alric was gone. They searched for 3 days. On the fourth, they found his crook leaning against a pine, and beside it, the bell, not on the yew, but resting gently on a flat stone. Still, silent. No one heard it ring again. But some say, in the deep mountain winds, when the stars hang too low and the trees stop rustling, you can hear a single chime, distant, soft, calling something home. So tonight, if a bell rings in your dream where no bell should be, don't follow. Alric already did, and that path rings only once. The widow who waited too long. In a crumbling cottage at the edge of a moor, where the fog sank low and never quite lifted, there lived a widow named Maud. She was not young, but not yet old, caught in that quiet space between fading and remembering. She wore gray. She tended her garden. She spoke to no one but the wind. She was waiting. For 30 years she waited. For a husband lost to war. A knight, some said. A deserter, whispered others. She never changed the story. She simply set a place for him at the table. Each night. Every night. His boots remained by the door. His cloak on the hook. His ring in a shallow bowl of lavender water. They told her he had died, that he would not return. She smiled politely, closed her door, lit her candle. One autumn evening, when the moon hung low and orange as a dying coal, she heard a knock. Not loud, not rushed, just 3 slow taps. She opened the door and was never seen again. The place at the table remained set, the food untouched, the fire burned low. No one entered the cottage after that. It was boarded, then buried in ivy. But sometimes, if you pass too close, you can hear cutlery gently shifting. The clink of spoon to bowl, the scrape of a chair across the floor, and a woman's voice saying softly, "You took your time." So if your dream tonight brings you to a doorway where someone once waited, and you feel the urge to knock, don't. She's already answered, and she's no longer alone. And now, dear listener, we've reached the end of our strange little journey. 50 stories, 50 quiet steps into the dim corners of medieval time, where fact and whisper gently blur. Perhaps your eyes are already heavy. Perhaps your thoughts are already distant. If so, that's just as it should be. For even in a world so full of harshness and hardship, there was wonder. And wonder, even the strange kind, can lull us to rest. So let the candle burn low. Let the shadows stretch a little longer. Let the past fold itself neatly behind your breath. And know that you are safe now, in this moment, in this stillness, with nothing left to remember. Sleep well, wherever you are. The bell has rung, the ink has dried, the wind has hushed. Good night.